Today's podcast focuses on something most people have never thought about: dealing with unsolvable problems. So let's jump right in. Imagine you're leading a team through a period of significant growth. Two of your strongest managers are in ongoing conflict. One believes the team needs a clearer structure, tighter accountability, and consistent execution. They lead with firmness. The other insists the environment is too rigid and that people need more autonomy to stay engaged and perform well. They lead with warmth. Now, you've facilitated many conversations between them. You've brought in new and innovative frameworks. You've tried splitting responsibilities. Yet the tension resurfaces every quarter when the bottom line results are measured. What you're witnessing is not a leadership failure or a personal problem to solve with the right hire or the right reorganization. It's an unsolvable problem. A conflict that persists not because the right solution has not yet been found, but because both managers carry legitimate ideas and values that cannot fully yield to the other. I hope that resonates with you guys. Everyone's got good ideas, but they don't necessarily blend together. Now, progress on this team will not come from proving one approach is superior to the other. It will come from learning to navigate the difference. So welcome back to the Rethink Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Zierk. This podcast is where we step back, pause, reflect, and explore smarter and more connected ways to lead and live by thinking with connection in mind, which is exactly what is meant by the word rethink, relationship-enhanced thinking. Rethinking your connection to yourself and the world around you. Today, we're going to rethink the topic of unsolvable problems and explain that people don't struggle because problems are hard. They struggle because they use the wrong strategy for the wrong type of problem. Now, humans are extraordinarily gifted at solving problems. We have the prefrontal cortex, we have our executive skills, we're amazing. From childhood, we learn to identify what is wrong, we trace it to a cause, and we fix it. So let's call this ABC thinking, because like the alphabet, once learned, it's forever remembered. Now, this skill is extremely valuable. It works well for scheduling errors, broken appliances, and simple miscommunications. You'll know you're dealing with a solvable problem when you remove the cause and the problem disappears. And once it's fixed, it stays fixed. It's been solved. The trouble is that we apply this ABC thinking to everything, including challenges that are fundamentally different in nature. What's critical to know is that many of life's most important difficulties are not puzzles waiting for the right answer. They are these structural tensions built into relationships, such as people having different values and kind of the unavoidable limits of different human capacities. These are not problems, they are conditions of life. You can see why the ABC thinking process runs up against this, and it disallows us from really dealing with the underlying opportunity to make better connections. So let me share a few more examples of unsolvable problems. See if this rings a bell for you. Personality differences, conflicting leadership styles, competing priorities, and different capacities for emotional regulation, tolerating distress, self-awareness, and of course, empathy. And these aren't broken systems to repair. They are permanent conditions to navigate skillfully. So when we treat these tensions as solvable, we create frustrations rather than progress. You'll know that you're trying to solve an unsolvable problem when your solution creates more problems. See how that works? The key is learning to distinguish between problems we can solve, the ones we must manage, and the ones that we can only navigate. Wisdom? Well, it's knowing the difference in real time when it's needed most. Knowing the difference between these three different types. So let's dig into these three categories or different types of problems. First, like I said, solvable problems have a clear cause and a clear fix. So I'm going to go to my whiteboard and write down the word solvable. And that's what we're talking about. And we know that the answer is fix. Solvable problems are available to fix, solve, and repair mentality. And what's interesting about a solvable problem is that once you address it, it disappears. This is where ABC thinking works beautifully. Now, we talked about it before, but let me bring it back. So some examples of solvable problems are, well, like miscommunications about dinner plans. That's solvable. Your child not turning in homework. That's solvable. And those pesky software bugs. That's solvable. Remember, once you fix the solvable problem, it stays fixed. That's how you know you're dealing with a solvable problem. Let's move on to the next one. And those are ones that are complex. We have solvable problems and we have complex problems. So beyond solvable problems, complex problems have multiple contributing causes. They don't respond to a single fix, and they require like ongoing management, and they demand sustained effort, even if they never fully resolve. So examples of complex problems include managing your child's ADHD organizational challenges. You know that, right? Where the child just can't keep it together. They need you as the parent to provide the structure, what's called the scaffolding. And as you provide the structure, the child then improves their ability to engage in the task at hand, their homework, attending to it, staying focused on it, and reaching their finish line. And then, of course, you remind them to turn it in. But you're managing it. This child, just because you've shown them once, doesn't mean that the next day is going to get any easier. You have to continue to manage the complexity of their ADHD. Another example would be dealing with team productivity inconsistencies. You just have to stay ahead of it. These are systems problems that continue to need to be monitored, manipulated, tweaked. And then we move in the direction of measuring them so we can get some improvement. And another example would be handling co-parenting communication problems. It kind of speaks for itself, but parents have different ways of seeing the situation. They communicate with their preferred style, and sometimes, of course, that leads to conflict. And that's what we have to manage. These are complex problems. So with complex problems, instead of fixing them, we manage them. Always understanding and realizing they're not going to go away like a solvable problem, but we manage the system that's continuing to support them. What you need to know about complex problems is they never, ever go away, but they do get easier to manage by making adjustments to the system that I'm talking about. Now, a common mistake is that people treat manageable problems like solvable ones. This is shown up by the thinking that says, if we just try harder, this will go away. Now, you can hear a parent saying that to a child, right? Try harder. But trying harder isn't the problem. It might be more of their cognitive capacity and their inability currently to maintain or introduce the structure that's needed in order for them to perform the task. And that's where you, as the parent with more of an advanced brain, come into play and provide that structure, and the child then performs accordingly. But the problem doesn't go away. It won't, but it can get better. We know this. As we manage the system around us, things can get better. It doesn't disappear, but you manage it. So there we have the two. Let's go to the third. And the third is, we talk about unsolvable. You're probably getting ahead of me and you're probably wondering, what do we do with unsolvable problems? But unsolvable problems are different from both solvable and manageable problems. They carry structural tension that I was talking about, in which both sides hold valid positions. And no one option eliminates the trade-off. You have to understand that. Trying to force a resolution usually generates new problems, more frustrations, more hidden agendas, rather than ending the original one. Things get worse, not better. Reorganizing which category you're dealing with is itself a skill. A problem is unsolvable when the core tension keeps returning. When each side has legitimate values, legitimate opinions, when no available option removes the trade-off, and when attempts to solve it directly tend to make things worse. We need a new strategy. You're experiencing an unsolvable problem when you find yourself saying, why can't we fix this? Or you have endless conflict, or what I call escalation cycles. Things start and they just keep building on top of one another, and here we go again. We're recycling. We're escalating. And you can feel this energy that's mounting and growing around you, and it's getting worse, not better. And once you reorganize the type, the strategy shifts entirely. The best examples of unsolvable problems involve how people are hardwired. Think of the contrast between people and how conflict is inevitable. So one person values autonomy, freedom, and requires space, while the other person desires connection and intimacy and needs closeness. Does that sound familiar? You can see the impasse, the gridlock that they get into. Here's another one. During a disagreement, one person values honesty and leads with direct truth. Let's deal with it. While the other person prefers harmony and preserving the peace. It's not like they don't want to talk about it, but they may not be ready to talk about it. And they need space to collect their thoughts, to find out what their deepest truth is. But you see the challenge, right? One person wants to jump in and deal with it right away, and the other person wants to delay that for a while so they can get ready to have an informed and mutually respectful conversation. A classic one happens in parenting. Let's return to that, where one parent believes in structure and discipline, and the other parent believes in the power of compassion and empathy. Now, they're both right, of course, but the primary way they lead into a problem creates a problem, an unsolvable problem. So in a nutshell, some problems in life require solutions. Others must be managed and require systems, and a surprising number of unsolvable problems must simply be navigated. And the wisdom of adulthood lies in learning the difference. So a key to handling life's problems in a relationally intelligent manner starts with diagnosing what the problem is. And when a misdiagnosis is made, trying to handle an unsolvable problem as if it's solvable, life gets complicated. When we treat unsolvable problems as solvable, we end up in endless conflict. Here we go again, is a common phrase in couples therapy. And when we treat manageable problems as if they're solvable, we experience mounting frustrations. And what's really interesting is when we treat solvable problems as unsolvable, well, we just end up avoiding them altogether. We give up because there's no solution. So let me dig in and give you a really good example. Let's go back to parenting. Consider two parents, and they both have big hearts. They'll both have really good intentions and genuinely different philosophies. Did you hear that? They have different philosophies. Now, people don't change their philosophies. You're supposed to share them, not impose them. Anyway, one parent believes in consistent structure and clear accountability. The other prioritizes emotional attunement and flexibility. Both approaches have merit. We know this. But attempts to prove that one parenting style is superior tends to escalate the conflict rather than settle it. And in parenting, we call that triangulation, where one parent is attending to let's call it the misbehavior of the child in a certain way, in a disciplined, structured way, trying to impose more structure. Again, big heart, good intentions. The other parent leads with more compassion and empathy and wants to have learning conversations. And what happens is, since they're at odds with one another, both trying to attend to the child's needs, trying to give them a life lesson regarding this misbehavior, what happens is the negative energy gets transferred between the parents. And that's the triangulation. So instead of both parents working together on correcting or facilitating a learning opportunity for the child in terms of their misbehavior, they end up fighting. They end up being in conflict with one another. Now, a more effective path is what I call mutual accommodation, creating a shared reality, understanding and appreciating each person's approach, skills, talents, and trying to bring that together. So when one parent takes the lead, perhaps one parent would take the lead on rule enforcement. The other focuses on emotional support. I think sometimes we do this very naturally. When you see parents who are working well together as a team, it doesn't mean that one is deferring to the other all the time, but they both trust each other, understand each other's strengths and talents, and basically they say, I think this one's best for you. Now, those are kind of unspoken, but it happens very naturally and organically in really good, effective parenting teams. And when they're working together on like this, one thing they do get together is major decisions are always done together. And the goal in the situation is functional balance rather than a perfect agreement, which is not possible. A shared reality that I talked about, it becomes possible, even when a shared philosophy does not. The same dynamic appears in organizational settings. I'm going to go back to my whiteboard here and put in the answer to what it is that we do with unsolvable problems, and that's navigate it. I'll come back to that. Anyway, the same dynamic happens in organizational settings. A leadership team may hold ongoing tension between risk tolerance and operational caution. You can kind of feel the tension between those two. Trying to eliminate that tension by forcing consensus often strips out the diversity of perspective that makes the team effective in the first place. Now, the goal in these kinds of situations is shifting from resolution to calibration. Isn't that fun? Shifting from trying to resolve it, trying to create a solvable problem when it's not, trying to find a solution when it's not a solvable problem, to calibrating, keeping both orientations in motion without letting one dominate. Now, the better approach is to treat these situations like a juggler handles water balloons, not by squeezing them into submission, but by keeping them moving without letting them burst. So the call to action this week, I'm asking you to become intimately familiar with 4 practices that support navigating unsolvable problems over time. The first one is recognition. Identifying when a problem is structural rather than solvable, so you stop wasting energy on the wrong strategy. Remember, this is not a solvable problem, it's a perpetual tension. Competing values, different philosophies. So, for example, a couple may repeatedly argue about security versus adventure. One partner wants stability and careful planning. The other one wants spontaneity and new experiences. The more the merrier. Neither trait is wrong, but neither can fully replace or dominate the other. Then it becomes a one-sided relationship, and that won't be sustainable. This is not a solvable problem. It is a perpetual tension. I'm trying to reinforce that. It's a perpetual tension. Therefore, the goal shifts from winning the argument to navigating the difference. So once we've done that recognition piece, we go to the second practice, and that's regulation. What are we regulating? Managing your own emotional response so the tension does not escalate into something more destructive. Unsolvable problems, I'm here to say, do not disappear with better logic or effort. They require emotional regulation, perspective taking, and behavioral restraint. Now, when you think about that, emotional regulation, perspective taking, and behavioral restraint, that's exactly what I'm talking about when I use the concept of relationship intelligence. That's how we turn conflict into connection. And this is why high intelligence does not guarantee success, because the task is not solving, it's stabilizing. This type of psychological containment prevents unsolvable problems from becoming relationship-destroying problems. And that is an amazing skill to acquire, practice, and exercise. Getting better when you're in a bad situation, not making it worse, but making it better. Therefore, the real skill isn't resolution, but regulation. The disagreement still exists, but it no longer dominates the relationship. And it gives us an opportunity to go into the third practice, which is mutual accommodation. I really do believe in the laws of mutuality. Finding an arrangement that honors both sides rather than requiring one to disappear. In relationships, unsolvable problems often arise from personality differences. We know this. Attempts to prove one style or one personal philosophy superior over another, we know what happens. It escalates conflict. One person's going to shut down. The other person's going to get aggressive. A better approach is this mutual accommodation, moving in the direction of mutuality, which is fostered by thinking with connection in mind. And that's what remind is, thinking with connection in mind. So instead of thinking about being right, we get it right. And that's an important saying. Understanding that rethinking something, thinking with connection in mind, it's really about shifting from being right, which is a very strong instinct of the mind, to getting it right. And getting it right, now all of a sudden, we're keeping us in mind. We're doing things with mutuality in mind. So consequently, the goal is not perfect agreement. It's functional balance. It's just a really important evolution to hold, going from perfect agreement, which doesn't occur, to functional balance. Because if you think you're reaching perfect agreement, I'm here to tell you that the other person is likely deferring to you to keep the peace, not to make things worse. The fourth practice is meaning making sense of something. Integrating the tension into your sense of identity and purpose. I think this is so important. When conflict arises, we can talk about what's going on the surface. Or we could talk about the feelings and the emotions that came up as a result of that conflict. We could talk about that. Those are important. Emotions are signals that if there's an unmet need, we need to talk about that. We can use our emotions very constructively. Or we can also go deeper and talk about how this conflict is impacting me from an identity perspective. When people are really dug in, when they're in gridlock, it's not about the facts of what's going on right around you. It's not about their feelings even. There's an impact on their identity. Now, people who navigate unsolvable problems well are not people who have found the solution before you. They're people who have developed resilience continuing to bounce back through sustained engagement during difficult moments. We're not in a rush to make the conflict go away. We're trying to have to be curious about what's causing the problem. So the problem doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of the story of who we become. So please take note that these 4 steps, they form a loop, not a finish line. Circumstances change, relationships evolve, people's needs also change, and the balance requiring ongoing recalibration is always, always, always present. People are in flux. People are developing, they're evolving, they're growing, they're supposed to. What they needed a year ago is very different than what they need right now from a psychological perspective. You know, how much attention, affection, acknowledgement, approval, and applause that they need, that we've talked about in a previous podcast, those really fundamental needs that we desperately need from other people and we can't give ourselves. So all of this gets down to that there's 3 kinds of wisdom that develop across lifetime. The first is that problem-solving intelligence, ABC thinking, the ability to identify a cause, apply a fix, and presto, you produce a clear outcome and the problem goes away. And again, if removing the cause eliminates the problem, it's solvable. That second system that we talk about, that's what's called systems intelligence. This involves the ability to handle manageable problems in complex environments. So if the problem improves significantly with better systems, it's a manageable problem, like we were talking about in terms of helping your child get better at attending to their homework by providing the structure and the support that they need. That's the system that you're manipulating, that you're managing, that you're tweaking. And the third problem is what I call navigating or relationship intelligence, the capacity to stay connected under tension, regulate your emotions under pressure, and negotiate differences without collapse. Now just think about that. It's so powerful to think about that. I talk a lot about relationship intelligence, but every once in a while we strike gold and we kind of go, there it is. Relationship intelligence, how to turn conflict into connection, really comes down to our capacity to stay connected under tension, regulate our emotions under pressure, and negotiate differences without collapse. Now, what's so fascinating about that is staying connected under tension is really, really hard. I wrote a book called Mind Rules, and the first mind rule is the mind is not relational. It's self-protective. It's focused on self-preservation. And under conflict, it's there to protect you. It's not there to negotiate or to move towards mutual respect and mutual agreement. That's something that you have to practice and override your mind's tendency to become self-protective. And also regulating your emotions under pressure. As soon as we become emotional, we get an escalation within us. That's a signal to the central nervous system to take care of business as quickly as possible and go back to what's called homeostasis. And almost certainly it's going to do it in such a way that will not facilitate better connection. It'll try to find a place for you to feel restored, to feel whole or safe again. That's really what the mind is doing under times of emotional arousal. That's very, very different than navigating conflict and then negotiating differences without collapsing. That's hard. Negotiating differences without collapse. But by knowing about how to navigate problems that are unsolvable, and we do this together, it's just a paradigm shift. So if solving one side creates a loss on the other side, that's an unsolvable problem. That's a one-sided relationship. Now remember, children are taught the first type of problem-solving intelligence. They learn their ABCs very well. And adults gradually learn the second. We learn systems thinking. We do. And life eventually requires the third. That's where the navigation model, the relationship intelligence model, comes into play. So it's a dynamic equilibrium model. You do not remove the constraint, magically make the conflict go away. You design around it. And in doing so, you develop the kind of relationship intelligence that differentiates functional relationships from high conflict ones. And also differentiate between adaptive teams from reactive ones. And people who grow through difficulty from people who are defeated by it. Now, imagine being in a work group of people who understand, practice, and exercise relationship intelligence. Conflict arises. And together, they begin saying, hey, what do we need to do? What's our next step? So instead of trying to get even, instead of trying to prove one point is better than the other, they realize conflict is in the room. And we need to do something about it. We have to navigate this. We're not looking for a solution. We're looking for stabilization. And I want to remind you that relationship intelligence is the ability to turn conflict into connection by correctly diagnosing whether a problem should be solved, managed, or navigated. And then once you've done that diagnosis, you adjust your behavior accordingly. So beyond experimenting with and integrating the 4 practices that we've talked about in navigating unsolvable problems, I'd like to invite you to my website at davidzierk.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter called Refresh. You can download a ton of resources, read a blog or two, and learn more from my quizzes and speaker topics. I also have a YouTube channel called Whiteboard Psychology, where I make learning about psychology visible and relatable. Check it out. Oh, and by the way, I also share quick tips about relationship intelligence on YouTube and Instagram. So again, this has been fun. And until next time, keep rethinking how you show up and do life.